And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another victorious episode of the Assembly Call. As tonight, the Indiana Hoosiers end 2014 with a bang and begin the Big Ten season in a huge way by getting a 70-65 victory over Nebraska in Lincoln. It was a game that, for about the first 24 minutes, looked like a carbon copy of last year's game, with Indiana jumping out to a big lead in the first half. The Hoosiers led by 16, much like they did last year in the first half. Nebraska came storming back. They used a big run at the start of the second half to take the lead. But unlike last year, the Hoosiers did not wilt, and they quickly regained control of the game, never gave it back, and held on at the end for the victory. Just a huge, huge way for Indiana to start the Big Ten season and to, like I said, end 2014 in a great way. What a game. What a game. We're going to talk about it tonight. I'm Jerod Morris, your host for tonight's episode of the Assembly Call. I am going to be joined by Ryan Phillips. There's a chance Andy Bottoms may join us. He's got some kind of neighborhood New Year's Eve festival thing going on, something like that, but he may pop in here a little bit. If I were a betting man, I bet he will, just because that game was so much fun and he'll want to talk about it. But either way, we're going to be here. You're here. I don't know. That was a fun game. Maybe we'll just take you all the way to midnight. That would be 5.5 hours. Ryan, I don't know what you have planned, but I feel like I could talk about this game for that long. Anyway, if you have questions, tweet them to us, #AssemblyCall. You can go to the YouTube page, talk there, ask us questions. We'll answer them. You'll have to excuse me. I'm a little excited, a little worked up. What a fun game. Okay, let's begin this show like we begin all of our shows with our banner moment, and then Ryan will have his rant. For me, the banner moment tonight is pretty simple. You know, like I said in the beginning, this game looked so much like last year's game. And I was even wondering, how are we supposed to celebrate a new year tonight when this year seems so much, like the last year? Well, there was a moment in the second half where Indiana was down by one. It was 43-42, and things had not gone well for the Hoosiers to start the second half. Nebraska was on a big run. Indiana had a really good defensive possession, and they actually took Nebraska all the way down to 2-3 seconds left on the shot clock, and Walter Pitchford hit kind of a bailout three-pointer to put Nebraska up by 4. And at that point, you're starting to think, geez, Pitchford's hitting these wild threes. Everything's falling apart. Our pets' heads are falling off. This game is looking just like last year's, and I think we all were kind of feeling some doom and gloom start to set in. But what happened after that shows us how much different this season and this team is than last year's team. Because whereas last year's team only scored 23 points in the second half, and just let Nebraska take control and never regained it back, Indiana was the team that went on the run after that. And I don't know what the exact run was. I'll have to look at the numbers. But it was significant. I mean, Nebraska led 43-42 at the under-16 timeout. Indiana had regained the lead at 51-49 by the under-12-minute timeout in the second half. And by the under-8-minute timeout, Indiana was up 61-52, clearly back in control of the game, and Nebraska cut it to 4 or 5 points, I think, once or twice the rest of the way, but Indiana made enough free throws, made enough plays to get the win. A huge win for Indiana to start out the season 1-0 in the conference, to exercise some demons in Lincoln, and to get a big road win. And we're going to break down all of these many factors. And so let me go collect myself, calm myself, and let's turn it over to Ryan Phillips and get his opening thoughts on this huge, huge, fun, exciting IU victory over Nebraska.
Yeah, I mean, I have to agree with you. I thought this was following the similar pattern as of last year, and within 3 minutes, Nebraska was within one to start the second half, and so that whole lead that they had worked really hard in the first half and played a great first half and worked really hard to build up, vanished all of a sudden. I think the key to the game for me is the fact that Indiana only hit 7 of 24 three-pointers. It was 29.2% from beyond the arc. They only hit 52% from the free throw line, 9 of 17. So that meant they had to get their points other places. And, Hunter Perea, Troy Williams really stepped up. We're making plays on the interior, something we haven't really been able to say about Indiana much this year. But Hunter at 12 and 10, I mean, it felt like 24 and 15 with how big some of those buckets were. And then, of course, Troy Williams at 13 and 6 with an assist, and he only turned the ball over twice, but he had the ball in his hand a lot of the time. And Hunter did that. Hunter had his 13 and 10 while only playing 4 minutes in the first half because of foul trouble. So, I mean, you had a guy who just stepped up completely in the second half, and he owned the game. I thought he was the best player on the floor in the second half for Indiana. The Petaway was unbelievable. But, you just had a guy playing his butt off, maybe, waking up a little bit. The light just seemed to have gone on for him and Troy in this game. I mean, it's been on for the last couple of weeks, but you're just seeing a different player than we saw last year. And I think that the fact that those guys are juniors and sophomores instead of freshmen, like we had last year, struggling through those games. I mean, those guys have been there before. They've seen what's happened, and they can also sort of react in the we're not going to let this happen again kind of way. So I just thought those two guys were incredibly impressive on both ends of the floor. And really were the key to Indiana winning this game. And it is, you're right, it's a huge win coming off of a disappointing loss to Georgetown. I mean, Georgetown's a tough team. We all know that. Playing close with them is actually a great achievement. But, an overtime loss to a team when you had a lead late and all that stuff, you could limp into Lincoln and play terribly, and that kind of would be expected, to sort of be a letdown after such a tough game on the road in New York. But no, they stepped up. They came out right off the bat and played well, and then they did enough in the second half to maintain it. And it wasn't just like they coasted to the end and, Nebraska just didn't have enough. Nebraska took a lead and looked like they were going to run away with the game, and Indiana stopped it, turned it around, took the lead back, and protected it late, and it was a big win. A great, impressive win for Indiana.
Absolutely. I mean, we've talked about it. If you just look at KenPom Indiana's schedule and KenPom the predictions, Indiana was expected to, was not favored to win these first 3 games, and so to get this win was really big. I know some people might think, why are you so excited about a win over Nebraska? Well, have you seen the last couple games at Nebraska? I mean, this has been a house of horrors for us. And so to literally be facing the exact same predicament that we faced time and time again there the last few years and to overcome it this time, just really good, really exciting, a great sign for this team. And, you talked about Hunter. I think, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, Nebraska isn't Rutgers. I mean, Tim Miles has done a really nice job there, and he's starting to turn that program around. I feel like a lot of people still have this perception of Nebraska as being a doormat basketball program. They're starting to really turn things around and be a very good team. He's got some really nice players. I mean, they're gonna be in the mix in the middle of that Big Ten this year. I strongly feel that way. They're light on the interior like Indiana. But, I mean, they play great defense, and they're a team that's going to be in the mix this year. That's a good win for Indiana. And I know some older IU fans will say, well, it's Nebraska. But that's a big win on the road. They're tough to play in their building.
This just occurred to me. We're going to get to Yogi and Hunter here in a second. But, you mentioned Tim Miles. And one of the moments of the game was, after a hard foul. I don't even know exactly what led up to this. Maybe you do, but Tim Miles gets in Tom Crean's face. It's this really weird moment where Tim Miles is being held back, and Tom Crean is just kind of stoically looking at him and, just kind of being very calm. And it's interesting, who knows if you draw any parallels there, but Indiana played a lot like their coach kept his composure there in that moment. Where Miles is going crazy and Crean doesn't really react. He just kind of stands there strong, stoic, kind of like how the team played. I was proud of Crean. I was happy to have him as our coach, as our leader there, kind of not, whatever Miles was doing, Crean wasn't going to take the bait. And, I thought showed some good leadership there, just staying calm, and his team followed suit.
Yeah, no, the thing is about what Crean did there was it wasn't like he was standing there stoically and occasionally saying fires or anything. He was dead silent. He just stayed there, stared him right in the eye, didn't say anything, and then he walked away, and you could see him say, I'm right here, sort of as look, if you want to come over here and fight me, I will stand right here, but we're not going to do that, and it was sort of a I'm standing my ground, but I'm not going to engage you kind of thing, and that's what you want to see from your head coach. You want him to be mature and not get caught up in the moment. We've seen Crean a few times get a little caught up in things, and it was really nice to see that, maybe just growth, the same kind of growth we're seeing with the program and the team, just sort of, absorbing the hit a little bit there and not reacting to it. And I thought he came out looking really good from that exchange, and Miles looked horrible.
Yeah, no, I agree. So, we talk about kind of poise at the end of the game there, and that's where I think Hunter and Yogi were so good. I mean, this game started out with Indiana's freshmen really leading the way early in their first Big Ten road game. Robert Johnson knocked down a couple of threes. James Blackman made a three. Indiana was, you mentioned the three-point shooting. Indiana actually made three out of their first four threes, which means that they went, just 4 for 20 the rest of the way. And Emmett Holt did a nice job in the first half when Hunter went out. But in the second half, it was really Yogi and Hunter. And so I want to spend some time talking about those two guys. And when the movement happened, right, and that's a term we don't use very much anymore. Usually when we do it, only in a pejorative sense. When that happened, we were promised nights like tonight, right? With a point guard who is a true floor general, doesn't necessarily have to score to lead, and that's exactly what Yogi did. He only had 5 points, but he had 8 assists. He had 5 rebounds. He only turned the ball over once. He played really good defense in stretches, I thought. He led this team. And again, he didn't have to do it with scoring, but he really set the tone. And that play that he had at the end when he knocked the ball off of Teran Petaway's leg, just a huge heads-up play that saved a possession for Indiana. And then Hunter Mascara-Perea all of a sudden turned into Noah Vonleh. I mean, Hunter with 12 points, 10 boards, and this is almost exactly the type of game we saw from Noah night in, night out in the Big Ten last year, where any rebound that's anywhere near him, he's sucking up, and that's exactly what Hunter did. And I'll tell you something else that really impressed me about Hunter tonight is there were a lot of moments where he had the ball in positions where you kind of expect a turnover based on what we've seen of him over the past couple of years, and he stayed strong with the ball. He stayed patient, and either it turned into some kind of nice little jump hook or move, or he just moved the ball to the next guy, kept the offense going instead of turning the ball over and losing a possession. I mean, he did have a couple of turnovers, but it felt like it could have been so much more. And like you said, he only played a few minutes in the first half because of the foul trouble. I think he had 1.3 boards, there very early before he got in the foul trouble. Finishes 12 and 10. I mean, look, we've talked a lot about this big hole that Indiana has down low, and then in the first Big Ten game, Hunter comes out 12 points, 10 boards, and when he was out with the foul trouble, Emmett Holt scores 6 points of his own, grabs 4 boards. I mean, that's 18 points and 14 rebounds between those two guys. I don't know if we can count on that every night, and Nebraska's not exactly loaded down low. But in terms of what we got from those two guys and from Yogi in the first Big Ten game of the year, absolutely couldn't ask for more, and that's why Indiana won this game.
Yeah, no, I think you're completely right. Those guys, if we somehow get them to however you divide it up between them, get them a double-double out of those guys with maybe 18 points and 11, 12 rebounds a game, that's golden. I mean, that's more than we expected coming in, and I think that's probably the goal, regardless of how you divide it up, who gets what. You're not asking Hunter to have a double-double every game. You're not asking Holt to do it, but between the two of them, if they can do that with Troy Williams and Blackman and Yogi chipping in on the rebounds, Johnson as well, you may be able to sort of fill that big hole that exists in the middle of the defense. But I think that it's been a really, really nice run here for a couple of these guys. I think Holt, after the Pittsburgh game, sort of hit the freshman wall a little bit. And I think you're seeing Blackman and Johnson trying to work their way through that right now. Johnson was shot out of a cannon early in this game. Blackman, I thought, at times looked as bad as he has all year. Then he played with some confidence in stretches too. So when you get to December with these guys, and I'm bummed I wasn't on the call for the Georgetown game because I really saw it in that game. When these guys are for the first time dealing with real schoolwork, are dealing with finals, are dealing with traveling for basketball for the first time, travel and play the next day, not travel and sit for a week at an AAU tournament, getting on a plane, getting off the plane, and dealing with practice every day and the normal bumps and bruises that go along with just playing all season. And you kind of run out of gas towards the end of December. I mean, that happens to almost every freshman we'll see. Very rarely do guys. I mean, we saw with Anthony Davis in December when he was a freshman at Kentucky. Had a pretty bad stretch in there. One of those was the game that Indiana beat Kentucky, and now he's one of the top 2 or 3 players in the NBA. Yeah, anytime I can mention that game, by the way, I'm going to.
Please do.
But that guy's one of the top 3 or 5 NBA players right now, and even he hit a really bad freshman wall. And so that's going to happen. So seeing those guys play well in the first half is really nice. But you've got to have those older guys step up in the second half and make something happen for you, because a lot of times these guys are going to wear down, and hopefully you hope they catch their second win sometime in the middle of January. That's what we're going to be counting on, since we rely heavily on those guys. But yeah, for a while here, the veterans who've been there, have been through this, know the deal, know how to balance, schoolwork and play and practice and playing and all that stuff, and are used to traveling and getting up for a game and all that stuff. You're going to see those guys need to step up over the next 2 weeks or so. And tonight they did, and it was really, really positive to see that.
So a few numbers here. Indiana scores 1.06 points per possession tonight. The Hoosiers came into tonight scoring 1.14 points per possession, but Nebraska came in as one of the best defensive teams in the country, 17th, holding opponents to less than 0.9 points per possession. So for Indiana to basically go almost 0.16 over what Nebraska was giving up in their building, really solid. And I think even better than that, and I want to talk with you about this, Ryan, is the defense, because we know how bad Indiana's defense has been, giving up 1.01 points per possession, 200th in America coming in. And tonight, Nebraska scores 0.97 points per possession, which is basically right at their season average of 0.96. And, so I think you can't really ask for any more from Indiana defensively than what they did. I mean, they gave up points to Teran Petaway and Siobhan Shields, but that's going to happen. Petaway had 23, Shields had 20, but they made him work for it. I mean, Petaway was 8 of 19. He was forced into a lot of long twos. Shields was 7 for 18, and they didn't let anybody else really go off. I mean, Pitchford had 11 points. He was 4 for 8, but no one else made more than one field goal. And I thought, especially after Nebraska made that little run, Indiana did a much better job of making things harder on Petaway and Shields, really making them work for it. And while they were able to make some nice, buckets, overall Indiana's defensive effort was pretty good. A big part of that is rebounding 82% of Nebraska's misses. They did a nice job of cleaning up the glass. And, overall Indiana out-rebounds Nebraska 44-31 tonight. Both offensive and defensive rebounding percentages heavily in Indiana's favor. But what did you see defensively? I mean, this is the first Big Ten game. It's in Nebraska's house, and I thought all in all a really solid effort for the Hoosiers defensively.
Yeah, and a few people on Twitter mentioned that Nebraska missed some easy layups and things like that to sort of inflate our defensive numbers. Well, they also hit some crazy contested threes and some crazy shots in the lane where guys were defended well and just kind of threw it up and it went in. So, I mean, that stuff usually balances out. I don't put much stock into the you missed easy layups. You'll get those back eventually, as long as you're not just awful. But I thought that one of the major things is we were contesting pretty much every shot. And that's, I mean, regardless of blocking a shot or being in position on defense, you get a hand on a guy's face or you at least make him think about his shot. You didn't see guys running open for Nebraska by themselves in the corner unless it was designed that way. There were a couple guys they were just going to let shoot threes. You pick your poison with any team, but Nebraska doesn't have great shooters outside of those three guys you mentioned. And, so they really, I think, picked their spots really well and used the rest of the guys to contest threes. I mean, they had some silly fouls and things like that, but that's going to happen in every game. But I just thought that, they worked hard to contest every shot and maybe not dive in for steals as much and things like that because, that gets your entire defense out of position. And they didn't take too many chances. They just kept the guys in front of them, contest the shots, and get the rebounds. And they really did a great job on the boards tonight. So I think that had a lot to do with it. You're not seeing them get easy second chances. And I thought they played well in man and zone. I thought Indiana's defense looked really good tonight, and forced Nebraska to play the way that Indiana wanted them to play, which is shooting over people, not going by people.
There was a stretch there where I was absolutely terrified anytime a shot went up by the opposing team because either they were going to make it or if they did miss it, there was a good chance they were going to get the offensive rebound. And I don't know about you, but almost overnight, and when I say overnight, I mean really the last 2-3 weeks, Indiana's become a good rebounding team. I mean, to the point where, tonight you go on the road and out-rebound them by 13. I mean, Honor gets 10. James Blackman Jr. continues rebounding well from the guard spot with 8. Troy Williams has 6, did a nice job. Yogi with 5. I mean, a really good just kind of team rebounding effort. Is there anything specific that you're seeing? I mean, clearly that was a point of emphasis. I mean, Tom Crean talked about it. It seemed like post game after post game after post game how we have to get better at rebounding. And clearly they've done something. I mean, there's definitely more focus. There's more effort and energy, it seems like, rebounding the basketball. Anything else you're seeing that contributes to, outside of Honor rebounding like Noah, anything else that you're seeing contributing to Indiana's, dare I say, prowess on the boards recently?
Well, I mean, Tom Crean is a Tom Izzo disciple, and Tom Izzo, we know, is easily the best coach in basketball, pro or college, maybe ever, at teaching guys to rebound and working on rebounding. So I'm sure he's borrowed from him a little bit, some of his drills, like the old Michigan State drills where they used to do 8-on-5 rebounding, and there's 5 defenders and 8 offensive players, and the defenders, if they didn't get the rebound, had to run laps. I mean, it's, stuff like that, which is absolutely ridiculous, but it teaches you to not let the ball hit the ground. And I think part of what we're seeing with these guys, rebounding, no matter what anyone tells you about size or anything like that, rebounding is all positioning and effort. And you're seeing these guys get in the right position. The effort was fine. It's getting in the right position and keeping the other guys away from the ball, then go grab it. Not, as soon as the shot's up, position yourself to grab it. You got to keep the offense, whoever your offensive player you're guarding is, needs to be blocked out, then you go get the ball. And I think early in the season we were just seeing guys kind of fade in to try and get the ball. You've seen balls bounce over their heads, balls bounce under them where the opponent can sneak in and grab it. Things like that you're not seeing as much. And I think Honor is the biggest example. I think he's had excellent rebounding position the last couple weeks. You're not always going to get the ball. It's not going to happen every time. Teams that have bigger players are going to reach over you and grab balls and put them back in and things like that. It's going to happen. But if you consistently are in the right position and you make an effort to go get the ball afterwards, you're going to out-rebound your opponents or at least be even with them. And, I thought against Georgetown, look, Josh Smith is one of the most talented post players in the country. If he cared about getting into shape or developing his game, the guy would be a top 5 pick. And he abused us on the boards and on offense there. But that's a special guy you're running into. I don't think that's something you can look for consistently. I think maybe Frank Kaminsky is going to be a guy you can't really do anything against except for hope that he gets called for over the back a lot. But again, from a game in, game out perspective, if you're getting position and you're showing the effort to go get the ball, you're going to win those battles. And I think that Indiana is starting to do that.
Great note from Justin Albers here. Says Hoosiers have won the rebounding battle in all 4 games since the Louisville loss. And, I mean, it's been night and day. So much of what Indiana's done has looked better since that Louisville game, including the second half of that game was terrible. And Tom Crean basically called his team out for not really competing. And things have sure looked better since then. Wow. Just, here's something interesting, Ryan. And, I think we all looked at the start of this Big Ten season, at Nebraska, at Michigan State, home against Ohio State, and it really looked frightening, and so you're thinking, man, we've really got to do well in this trio of games, Louisville, Georgetown, and Butler, to get some momentum going into these games. And, man, Indiana could start out 0-3. Things could really be bad. Well, a funny thing happened before tonight's game even started, and that's that projection for the Ohio State game actually flipped to a win for Indiana. I'm looking at KenPom right now, where now Indiana's predicted to win 81-80. And now Indiana's got this win over Nebraska, and Michigan State, they just lost at home last night to Maryland, and, they're not looking like world beaters. So it's funny how, I mean, it's the fascinating thing about sports is how quickly things can change. I mean, imagine right before the season began, how much tumult there was for the IU basketball program. And if you had told any of us, hey, you're going to be 11-3, 1-0 in the conference with a win at Nebraska on New Year's Eve, would you take it? Everybody would have, excitedly, wouldn't have thought twice about it. And now we're looking at this start of the Big Ten season where it's like, hey, there's this winnable game at Michigan State. Yes, very tough place to play, not a place we win very often, obviously, and it would still be a surprise to win there, but it's not some foregone conclusion we're going to lose. And then you come home to play an Ohio State team that hasn't exactly looked great against the good competition that it's played, and all of a sudden, Indiana's looking a lot better. So, I mean, things change so quickly. And that's what's crazy is in another month, things could change again, and we could be on a 4 or 5 game losing streak, and the excitement of New Year's Eve has kind of worn off. So, we talk about how it's a roller coaster and just such an up and down process following this team, and especially this conference. I mean, this is kind of what this year is going to be like, isn't it? I mean, don't you just kind of expect kind of a crazy topsy-turvy Big Ten conference season with one really good team, maybe 8 or 9, kind of okay teams that are trying to be good, and maybe a couple will emerge. It's just going to be a crazy season, don't you think?
Yeah, I do. And the thing that gives me hope for this Indiana team as opposed to some of the other Big Ten teams is the thing that Indiana's done that a lot of these other Big Ten teams haven't is it has steadily improved. You've seen a slow growth and improvement, especially from key players like Troy Williams, Honor, until they hit that freshman wall. Both Johnson and Blackman were getting better every week. Emmett Holt was getting better every week. So you're seeing a team that looks nothing like the team that lost to Eastern Washington already. If you look that far back. Sure, if you look at Louisville, we still have some of the same holes that are getting shored up, game by game. And if you look at Georgetown, yeah, there's still some of the same concerns. But if you look, at the very beginning of the season, maybe those first couple games, we are a completely different team. They're playing with confidence. They're playing with, a little bit of swagger. You're seeing Yogi throw alley-oops to Honor in traffic. I mean, when did we ever see that before today? I mean, maybe
AAU highlight videos when they were
I mean,
recruits.
really. Like,
Yeah.
And by the way, and I said on Twitter, that was a brilliant decision by Tom Crean to allow them to do that within the offense, because if you can't get the ball to Honor through traffic because you're worried about him dropping the ball, put it up near the rim and let him throw it down. I mean, that, it's a way to use his athleticism to get him involved. I'm fine with it. But no, I think that the thing about Indiana compared to some of the other Big Ten teams is you're seeing them steadily improve. Their last 2 losses were to a great Louisville team and to, I think, an underranked Georgetown team that is very good, especially when Josh Smith plays like he actually wants to be on the floor. That's a dangerous team when they play like they're supposed to. And so those are your 2 losses. You were in the game for 33 minutes against Louisville. Then, their experience and everything just took over and killed us. And against Georgetown, you went to overtime, at Madison Square Garden. I mean, you can't really complain about either of those losses. And since then, you've seen them steadily improve. We were allowing cupcake teams back into games early in the season, and now you're seeing them you saw them at the end of the non-conference closing them out. I mean, so you're looking at other Big Ten teams that are struggling, and you don't really know what they're getting. Well, it's a solid incline on the improvement scale for Indiana, which gives me hope that by the middle of Big Ten season, if everybody else is running into each other's heads and knocking each other around, maybe this will be a consistent growth curve for Indiana, which is incredibly positive. But like you said, I mean, a couple months ago, if somebody asked you if you wanted to be 11-3 with a win over Nebraska on the road and heading to Michigan State, which is a nearly impossible place to play, and I'm sure Coach Izzo will have them ready to play off a loss. But it's a Michigan State team that's reeling. They lost to Texas Southern. I mean,
Mike Davis.
It's a team. It's a team that can be beaten, and we know that. Beginning of the season, I don't think anybody would have said, "Oh, well, Indiana, Michigan State, that's gonna be a good one." I mean, they may still beat Indiana, but at the same time, you're like you said, you're not just chalking that up as a loss. I mean, they can play with these guys, and so it's going to be a fun season and exciting, and hopefully not as roller coastery as we had it last year, but at the same time, I do expect a lot of mess in the middle of that Big Ten, like you said.
Hey, let's talk about Tom Crean real quick. Andy's not here, so we can speak good about Tom Crean without immediately being countered. So Jim Bernstein on Twitter says, looked like a gadget D in second half with extra man cheating toward Petaway. I want you to talk in a second just about the defense and just in general, the adjustments. Brian Tonsani over in the chat on YouTube says, Crane gets a lot of criticism for in-game coaching. Tonight he made a few good adjustments. Offensively versus zone with guard in the middle, another with lob plays to Honor, as you mentioned. On defense, went to a line and 2, which changed the momentum, really kind of shading guys toward Petaway and Siobhan Shields. But just in general, for, again, kind of the theme of the show, for this game to go so much like last year's did for the first 24 minutes, and then to be able to reverse that, and, kind of symbolically stand in the face of the storm. I mean, I guess he did it symbolically and literally with, Tim Miles coming at him, and then, with Nebraska coming at Indiana, and the Hoosiers were really really able to weather that storm, even with a lot of freshmen playing. I also think something that Crean gets criticized for, and that we even wonder why he does so much, is go so deep into his bench late in games. Well, tonight I don't think Stan played in the second half, even though I thought he did a few good things in the first half. His decision to take a 3-pointer notwithstanding. Max may have played a couple minutes in the second half, but didn't play much. Otherwise, and even Emmett didn't play a whole lot in the second half because Hunter was in there. Tom really tightened the bench in the second half, and I thought the guys who played, he made good offense, defense, free throw substitutions there late in the game. I just thought overall, we've come to expect Indiana to get outcoached, outplayed, out-toughed on the road in games like this. And tonight it was almost the complete reverse. I thought Tom really had some good adjustments ready for Nebraska's adjustments, which we haven't had the last couple of years.
Yeah, I have not been shy about saying this over the last few weeks. I think this is the best coaching job Tom Crean has done at Indiana, hands down. I don't think it's even close. The team with the watch shot, they went to the Sweet 16 and lost to Kentucky. That was a great year. It was at 11 and 12, 2011 and 12. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, we got to the Sweet 16 and we're number one for most of the year in 2012, 2013. But I think this is by far his best coaching job, just given what he's had to deal with at the beginning of the year, the team's obvious deficiencies in rebounding and post presence and all that. Yet they're 11 and 3, and they haven't looked awful in really any games. I mean, there are stretches where they've looked awful, but with so many young guys playing and in the rotation, he's getting them to play in the system and work right. And I agree, his in-game adjustments are leaps and bounds better this year than they were last year, which makes you wonder if maybe that team last year just didn't adhere to the adjustments or something, or maybe he just learned so much. You don't really know we don't really know what's happening. I would assume the throwing lobs to Hunter is a designed thing because one of them came off of an inbounds play and one of them came off of a pick and roll rotation. But again, that could just be the players figuring that out. But at the same time, you have to give credit to the coach for at least giving them this, the confidence to do something like that. As far as the defensive adjustments, I thought he made great defensive adjustments at Butler that won us that game when I watched it on replay. And I thought that tonight, again, guys were shading towards Petaway, trying to force him to shoot threes as opposed to letting him drive. Because he's a great mid-range player, and he's great at getting to the hoop, and you want to force that guy to shoot threes. Now, he hit a couple of ridiculous guarded threes, but it was really nice to see sort of an adjustment, take out their best player, make the other guys beat you. And I thought that they did a really good job of that. And again, given where this season started and with all the negativity around the program and with people calling for his head, I think he's hunkered down and done a phenomenal job so far. And I like Coach Crean personally. I have been very critical of him over the last 6 months. Maybe I wasn't as much before that. I think people would say that. But, I mean, you can't deny that he has done an excellent job coaching this team so far this year.
Yep, I agree with you. One factor we haven't talked about yet tonight is Indiana's bench. And I thought it was really – I don't think enough people talked about how much Indiana's bench struggled in that Georgetown game. I mean, you take Georgetown to overtime, and I think Indiana had 1 point or 2 points, something like that, from its bench. And we've talked on this show a lot about how, unlike last year, you can really count on the bench this year. Guys like Colin Hartman and, Nick Zeisloff being able to come in, give solid minutes, even score points. And I thought we got that tonight. We talked about Emmett Holt, who stepped in for Hunter in the first half and was terrific. He finishes the night with 6 points, 4 boards. He had 2 offensive rebounds. He had a block and altered a couple shots in the first half. He was asked to fill a specific role in that first half when Hunter was in foul trouble, and he did it. Colin Hartman was out there doing Colin Hartman's things. He was back to playing his 16 minutes. He only scored the 1 point, but he had 4 boards. He had a block shot, and I thought, what we continue to see from Colin Hartman, there's no real way to quantify this, but I have to think he's one of the best ball movers in the country. Like, that's something that kind of goes underrated with guys, but just with an offense like this, with so many shooters, so many scorers, the ability for a guy who isn't a top option to move the ball so it gets quicker to the next guy who can score with it. And I think Colin continues to do a good job of doing that, played solid defense. Nick Zeisloff came in, knocked down a couple of free throws. He had 5 points. Stan Robinson in the first half had 6 points. So, I mean, he, did some good things while he was in there. I think it's big, for Indiana. Again, the Georgetown game, the bench gives us nothing. We lose in overtime. Tonight, we win by 5 on the road, and the bench, Emmett was 6, 12, Stanford 17, 18 points from the bench. And I think that's a difference. And that's a big difference for this team. When the bench plays well, Indiana plays well, and I thought tonight, just another prime example of that.
Yeah, I thought that the key was, I mean, a lot of our bench points have come from essentially uncontested threes for Zeisloft or Hartman, or fast break layups and putbacks by Holt. I mean, you've seen that over the last couple weeks. That's where they're getting most of their points. Tonight there weren't those. I mean, Zeisloft had 2 or 3 really good looks at 3 that he missed. He knocked down a big one when Nebraska was in the middle of trying to take the game back over, that really helped get us sort of on the right track. But other than that, he took a couple bad shots. I mean, maybe it's just frustration for not getting clean looks like he was getting earlier in the year when he was starting and had the other guys on the floor that were, playing enough or playing well enough to suck the defense in. But I think that, those guys chipped in other ways. And like you said, Hartman was just around the ball. He got his ankles broken on a crossover, but, got up and apparently is okay. But other than that, I mean, they just were solid, and they're guys you can count on. Like you said, I mean, you can count on them to not look bad. Zeisloft had one bad defensive series that stood out to me, but other than that, I mean, when you're getting one bad defensive series out of your bench, that's pretty good. So I thought that, they get in there, and like you said, they move the ball when they don't have a shot. They do the right things. Holt's there setting screens, causing havoc in the middle just with his hilariously long arms, altering shots and knocking the ball around. I mean, it's so they're doing the right things that you need to do from the bench. They're playing roles. They're coming in. There's not much of a drop off. You're not feeling like, oh God, James Blackman's going to the bench and Zeislov's coming in. We're doomed. You feel like the only guy you feel like there's that drop off with is when Yogi leaves, and that's just because he's an incredible ball handler and sort of a next level guy, and he's our floor leader, and that's going to be, every team has that. So, the fact that we don't feel a sting when there is a substitution, like last year when Vonleh went off, it was, oh, we're done for now. You're not seeing that this year. You're sort of seeing some balance out of the team, and that's really a big deal, especially when we get deep into the season. You're going to see guys get into foul trouble with Big Ten officials at the helm. You're going to see guys get into foul trouble. You're going to need that depth on the bench, and you're going to need those guys to play extended minutes. So it's very positive that these guys can come in and contribute, even if they're not pouring in 20 points a game.
Tim Miles was, of course, asked in his post-game press conference what he and Tom Crean talked about, quoting Mike Miller on Twitter here. Miles done having words with Crean. We just talked about the weather, tulips and flowers. I have no comment. So
I thought it was going to be. I thought Crean's Twitter etiquette maybe offended Miles, and that's what we were.
Yeah. Oh. Okay, I want to talk real quick about Troy. We haven't talked about him. I actually don't think Troy played that well tonight, and here's what I mean by that. I think that's actually a compliment to Troy because he still finished with 13.6 boards. He only had a couple of turnovers. He had an assist, and he did some good things. Actually, when Nebraska was on a 17-2 run that spilled into the second half, and there was a possession where Troy basically said, "Screw it, I'm taking the ball and I'm scoring," and he got it at the top of the key. You could tell he wasn't going to pass. Took it in, missed the shot, grabbed a rebound, scored. It was a really big play just to kind of settle things down, stop the momentum a little bit. And, I think last year if Troy has a game where he's got 13.6 boards, he's 6 of 10 from the field in 23 minutes, we're all going crazy saying that Troy played a great game and how much he's grown. Well, I actually think Troy has progressed to the point now where we can expect even a little more from him than what we got tonight. And what I mean by that is I think one of the things Troy has done over the past, especially in the Butler game and the Georgetown game, is find the happy medium between being crazy out of control off the dribble and, those times where he just turns it over, flings up some wild shot that has absolutely no chance of going in, balancing that, getting rid of those moments, those bad Troy moments, and really having more good Troy moments where his drives either set someone else up or he gets to the basket. And I thought he had a few wild and crazy drives where instead of keeping his head up and having the option to pass, he almost looked like, I'm going to take this and score no matter what. And I think he got himself into trouble on a couple of those. And they turned into just a couple of wasted possessions for IU. So, I say Troy didn't play well. He still had a very good game and was huge in Indiana winning this game. Again, 13.6 boards, 3 of those rebounds offensive. He did a lot of good things. But I think we're getting to the point now with Troy where he's starting to play consistently enough that we can expect even better from him than what we got tonight. And I think if he continues to understand what a good drive is, how to effectively use his dribble, he's just going to keep getting better. What do you think of his overall play tonight?
I thought there were stretches where he was really good, but I agree with you. I mean, there were parts where he was sort of disappointing, and Nebraska did a really good job of taking away his driving in the second half. That was sort of why you saw a plateau there. But they constantly had help side guys ready to step in if he got by his initial defender. But the thing about Troy is you're starting to see consistency. If 13-6 is his baseline, and then jumping up, to 18-7 or 8 is sort of his average or something like that, I'm fine with it. But I think that he also did a lot of things tonight. We've talked about his defense before not being, especially last year, just being a disappointment. And yeah, there are still lapses from time to time, but I thought his effort on the defensive end was much better. And I thought, he's sort of Energizer Bunny-like on offense. He is constantly going after rebounds. He's constantly going after the ball. And as long as he's smart about it and doesn't get stupid over the back calls and things like that, then whatever he does out there as far as statistically is fine with me, because a guy like that wears on a defense. It is a pain to guard a guy like that or to block a guy out like that. I mean, when you're blocking a guy out, you want him to be on your butt and not try and beat you. And Troy Williams is not that guy. He's gonna make you work to keep him away from that ball. And so, yeah, there were some negatives tonight, but overall a positive, I think. I mean, yeah, we're starting to get to the point, especially after that Georgetown game that he dominated at times. You're starting to get to the point with him where you want to expect more and want him to take it to the next level quickly. But I feel like over the last month or so, the light has really gone on with him, and we talked about that with Hunter as well. I just feel like he's getting it, and he's sort of not playing wildly. He did that a few times tonight. You're right. But, I mean, that used to be the norm, and now it's abnormal. And hopefully that consistently keeps being the case, and he starts to – because, I mean, like we've compared him to Victor Oladipo because of their athleticism and things like that and potential, raw basketball potential. And the light for Victor went on when he realized he didn't have to overdo it, and he could, play within, what his skill set was and – use that to get better instead of trying to do things he was never going to be good at. So I think that with both guys, you want to get to the point where they're playing consistently within their skill set. And with Troy, that's not going to be knocking down three-pointers or long jump shots. He's going to be a guy who gets to the rim, gets fouled, and then he's got to make his free throws. And on the defensive end, he's going to be a guy who just keep a guy in front of you, make him shoot over you, and use your athleticism to outplay those guys. So, again, like you said, I got off track there a little bit, but as far as tonight, I think that you're seeing him realize his potential more and more, even though it may not be his best game of the year. It's something that's encouraging to see that, well, even though it wasn't a great game, he still played pretty well at times and had some great stretches. So that's different, and that's something that we should expect to continue throughout Big Ten season.
What's always interesting about doing the show since we start it live immediately after the game is we don't really have time to process things or kind of look at the stats or, and a lot of times I'll find myself, after we talk about it and we have a chance to look at the numbers, feeling a little bit differently about the game than I did, when we get on here. And obviously any win, especially on the road, you're going to be excited. And, it's like the Georgetown game. I felt good about it, but I started to get frustrated the longer the show went on about the missed opportunity and what Indiana could have done better. Frankly, as I look at the numbers from this game, I'm even more impressed with Indiana's victory because of how unlikely it is. So here's what I mean by that. We all have expectations for how we think games are going to go, and this team has certain strengths, and we think, okay, Indiana's going to have to make threes. Yogi's probably going to have to score well for us to win. Blackman's going to have to shoot well for us to win. We kind of list out all these things are going to have to happen for Indiana to win. Well, take a look at some of the things that actually happened tonight. Yogi only scores 5 points. Blackman only scores 8 points. Indiana shoots 29% from three-point range. Whereas coming into the game, Indiana's shooting 41.7%. That's sixth in the country. All right. Indiana, the effective field goal percentage, 50.8 tonight. Coming into the game, Indiana's effective field goal percentage was 57.7, ninth in the country. So a lot of Indiana's strengths didn't really come out tonight. We didn't shoot as well. We didn't score as well as we normally do. And there's a team that, like we talked about, has struggled rebounding, and yet we win because we out-rebound Nebraska in their home gym by 13. And, and defensively, we go into an opposing Big Ten team and hold them to under a point per possession. Granted, that's not a huge accomplishment for most teams, but Indiana is actually the only team in the Big Ten that through non-conference play was giving up more than 1 point per possession. We had countered it, obviously, with our terrific offense. But I think to be able to go in and do that and really kind of flip the script and win a game with toughness, even win a game with defense, win a game with rebounding on the road, to me it leaves me even more impressed because most nights we're going to shoot better than we did tonight. Most nights we're going to score more than 70 points. Most nights we're going to get double digits from Yogi. We're going to get double digits from James Blackman Jr. So to be able to overcome that, still win a game against a pretty good opponent that people thought a lot of coming into the year. They've struggled a little bit, and especially a place that we've really struggled. I don't know about you, but as I look more, as I think more, I'm getting more and more impressed with this win, and not just what it means for tonight, but what it suggests about this team. That this team doesn't have to be clicking on all cylinders. This team doesn't need to be have some great offensive output to win on the road. This team can take a few punches, have a few of its strengths not working, and still find a way to grind out, eke out a victory anyway. The best IU teams have always been able to do that. So far, so good through one game of Big Ten play.
Yeah, I think the key word that you mentioned there was toughness. I mean, this was a game where it was rugged. I mean, Nebraska is known as a tough defensive team, and when you have a reputation like that, officials usually let you get away with some hard stuff that doesn't get called. And it went both ways in this game. I think there were a lot of missed calls, but if you're going to call it the way it's been called in their non-conference season. But at the same time, IU answered that. And I mentioned this on Twitter in the game, IU's biggest problem last year, and even on the team that was ranked number 1 and went to the Sweet 16, with Zeller and those guys, IU's biggest problem for the last couple of years has been finishing through contact because you're not always going to get the foul. I mean, you're going to go into the Kohl Center in Wisconsin, they're going to have 10 fouls all game. That's just the way it is. I mean, I don't know what Bo Ryan feeds the officials, but it must be really, really good because they don't call fouls on Wisconsin.
He intimidates them with his face.
I guess. I mean, but so you got to finish through contact because there are going to be a lot of calls, especially in Big Ten play, that do not get called when you need them to get called. And so I thought tonight we did a great job finishing through contact. Everyone, I mean, from Johnson to Perea to Troy Williams, Yogi Ferrell, I mean, you all saw them get hammered on drives, get knocked off their position. And if you don't make the shot, at least, don't get discouraged because you don't get the call. Go right back up and get that rebound and put it back in. And you saw them do that tonight, and they fought through it. And that shows toughness. And it also shows, not just physical toughness, but mental toughness as well when things aren't going your way, to stick with it and keep pushing and keep doing what you're supposed to do. And you've got to play offensively. You got to play like they're never going to blow that whistle. And so you didn't see that, especially last year, and that cost us big time last year. But you've got to play through that contact because it's going to come, especially in Big Ten play, and the whistle is going to be in the pocket of these officials for a long time. So you got to play through it, and they did tonight, and I think that's encouraging. And they've been doing it. That's been a pattern. They've been doing that for the last month or so, and it's a different team this year as far as that goes.
What's ridiculous is, especially for a team that is so renowned for its offense and so built around its offense, we win our first road Big Ten game of the year. We haven't even talked about, really, Indiana's leading scorer tonight. It was Robert Johnson. Robert finished with 14 points. He was one of 3 Hoosiers in double digits. Troy had 13. Hunter had 12. And frankly, I thought Robert really came out and set the tone with the 2 threes that he made. He's been great all year from the wings, and got a couple open looks early, knocked him down when Indiana was struggling. Nebraska, I think, jumped out to an 8-2 lead, and Robert had scored 7 of our first 8 points. And he really has been struggling from a scoring standpoint, has been turning it over a little bit too much, only had 1 turnover tonight. So he didn't stuff the stat sheet like he normally does, only had 1 rebound, did not have an assist despite bringing the ball up and initiating Indiana's offense a lot, which was somewhat surprising. But he got back to being efficient shooting. He was 5 of 9 from the field. He was 3 of 6 from downtown. And I tell you what, when he went up, I don't remember if it was in the second half or the first half, but he went up and took a nasty spill gotten kind of a little collision there with Siobhan Shields going for the rebound. Not dirty in any way on Shields' part, but he's probably going to still be picking splinters out of his ass later tonight because, I mean, he hit the floor hard. And, when it first happened, I thought, maybe he broke something or he's going to be out for a while. And for him to then come back in, score 6-7 more points, and a lot of times he brought the ball up tonight, which just shows you how much Tom Crean trusts him. But, let's talk a little bit about Robert. A lot of times he goes unnoticed just because, he's kind of unassuming and he doesn't draw a lot of attention to himself, and sometimes things that he does goes unnoticed. But, hey, you come out and lead Indiana in scoring in a game where they get a big road win against Nebraska, you did something pretty important. And so I thought, Robert, who has struggled, for him to come out and play like he did tonight, especially the way he started and kind of led Indiana in the beginning of the game, really impressive performance from him.
Yeah, if you look at his scoring totals in the Louisville game, he had 5. Grand Canyon, he had 7. Butler, he had 3. New Orleans, he had 8. And then against Georgetown, he had 11, but I didn't think he played particularly well. But he hit a couple threes, which really upped his point total. And then, so I think that maybe it was at a point where he was kind of, it looked like he was fired up tonight to come out and do something. And you saw initially, though the first 3 he took, I was kind of like, whoa, what are you doing, Robert? And he hit it, so I was thrilled. But, it was just kind of a quick shot that he got open. And then his second one was contested and went down. Maybe it's just him trying to get himself back on track. Like I talked about earlier, that freshman wall hits hard, and guys, aren't necessarily aware of it when they're in it. You've also seen his minutes drop. You see Louisville, he had 25, Grand Canyon 22, Butler 19, New Orleans 16, and then he had 27 against Georgetown. He had 23 tonight. We're seeing him consistently in the 25-30 range early in the year. And so it's a product of the bench developing as well, which maybe it's better for a freshman to play fewer minutes and try and be more impactful in those when he does get his chances. I thought the first half he was excellent. I thought the second half it was kind of like we've seen the last couple of weeks, just sort of fading through, making some mistakes, not being as aggressive as he should be. I mean, he's just got to develop the confidence to know that he's better than most of the guys on the floor that he's going to face. And once that light goes on and he realizes that, he's going to be unstoppable in some ways. And I thought that he did an okay job facilitating the offense in the second half, but I didn't think he stood out. And that injury was in the second half. That came down. And yeah, I was impressed that he got back off the bench and he sat out for a few minutes and then came back in and looked fine. He'll probably have about 12 ice bags taped to his hip on the plane home, but hopefully.
So will Honor. He took a pretty bad spill once too. So get the champagne off ice. We need the ice.
Yeah, exactly. Celebrate your New Year's later. There's basketball things to worry about.
Yeah. Tim Garl, get to work, Tim Garl. There's no New Year's Eve celebrating tonight.
So yeah, I mean, I thought that he did lead us in scoring. I thought most of the work he did was in the first half, and so you hopefully you see him, starting to be able to go deeper into games and affecting the game. But again, as I've said, it's typical of freshmen. You just see him sort of tire late in games at this time of year and hopefully catch a second win. I mean, you think about it, these guys haven't played intense basketball games this close together ever. I mean, they're high school games. They maybe play 2 or 3 teams that are comparable to them, throughout their entire career. And, James Blackman probably had teams throwing everything at him, but he was so good that he could just dribble through everybody and score. And he maybe had 1 or 2 big matchups a year. And you're seeing with Robert Johnson, probably the same thing. I mean, they've never played this many intense basketball games in a row. Because some people say, oh, well, their AAU teams played other big AAU teams. That's not comparable. Those are showcase games where guys are just looking to score and impress scouts. It's not a battle. And now you're playing against grown men, and it's going to wear you down. And so hopefully they catch their second win in the next few weeks, and I'm sure Robert will be – he'll be fine. There's nothing to worry about with he or James long term. It's just a matter of getting them in sync with this team and continuing to be contributors.
One more number I want to highlight before we get on to final thoughts, and then get on with our New Year's Eve celebrations, which are going to be so much more joyous and happy because Indiana won tonight. I hate to say that, Indiana, typically there is a New Year's Eve game for Indiana. In fact, I think every year since we've started the show, there's been a game on New Year's Eve. And it definitely kind of colors how my New Year's Eve goes depending on how IU does. So tonight's game will definitely make it a happier New Year's Eve celebration. Here's the number I want to talk about, Ryan, and it is the turnovers forced number. So we talked about how Indiana's better this year at turning the ball over less, 17.3%, coming into the game, 47th in the country. But the thing is, we're still giving away more possessions than we're taking because our ability to force turnovers is horrible. I mean, of all of our stats, that's actually the worst one in terms of rating in the country because we're only forcing turnovers on 16.8% of possessions, which is 317th in the country. And so tonight, in the first half, Indiana only forced one turnover from Nebraska. And I thought that was a big part of why Nebraska was able to hang around, even though it felt like Indiana was controlling the game. We weren't taking any possessions away. And so Nebraska, they only scored, I think it was 0.8 something points per possession in the first half, but they had a lot of possessions to score points on, and so they kind of hung around. Well, in the second half, Indiana ended up forcing 7 turnovers. Yeah, Nebraska finished with 8. And so for the game, it still wasn't good. Nebraska only turned it over on 12% of their possessions, so Indiana's already bad defensive turnover percentage is going to get even worse. But I thought when Indiana really needed to in the second half, they were able to do a little bit more to put some pressure. Now, a couple of those turnovers were unforced, but Indiana did a little bit more. And we know how much Crean loves deflections, so you would think that they would be able to get more turnovers. Why is Indiana having such a hard time this year forcing turnovers? Is it simply because, we do struggle guarding guys in the post, and so we're playing a little bit back? We don't want guys to drive in, and so we're not overplaying as much, we're not gambling as much, and just trying to be safer? Is it something else, and is it sustainable? I mean, how important do you think it is, that Indiana simply isn't forcing its opponents to turn it over very much?
Well, 2 things. One, you hit on perfectly, which is they're sagging off a little bit to help on the post because they really don't have, they're not confident in their post defense being able to handle everything on its own. I think that's a big part of it. You're seeing guards not overplaying at the top of the key. You're seeing guys play inside the three-point line defensively, and you're not seeing them out trying to force things. I might actually like to see us use some pressure, not necessarily a full-fledged press, but maybe pressure in the backcourt a little bit, and I think that would get teams going faster. Maybe
we did it once and forced a turnover, didn't we, in the second half, if I remember correctly?
Yeah. And it was kind of a token pressure with Troy out front, but it was there and it worked, and it makes the defense think, or it makes the opponent think. But I think that you hit it on the head. I think they're sagging down to help the post a lot, and that's going to lead to less aggressive man-to-man defense. You're not leaving that post player on an island back there. I also think we're playing a lot of zone, which helps cover up post deficiencies, and you're not going to turn the ball over as much if you're facing a zone. You're just going to take worse shots likely. And I think that you also have to look at, this is tough to quantify, but how many bad shots are opponents taking? Because sometimes a bad shot is just as bad as a turnover. And so you're seeing a lot of guys launch threes against us, against contested threes, which if they don't go in is just the same as a turnover, because it's a wasted possession. So,
well, it is now that we can rebound. It wasn't before.
Yeah, no, for sure, absolutely. Before that was just like a pass, and but like, hey Bobby, look up, I'm gonna shoot.
Yeah,
a dunk. But no, I think that I do think it's interesting that we're not turning the ball over as much with how aggressive our defense usually is. But I think a lot of that has to do with overcompensating for post play and not overplaying on the perimeter as much, and not because they're not picking guys up when they're 40 feet away from the basket. They're picking them up when they're about 25 feet away from the basket, and they're not overplaying out on those dribble handoffs and things like that. You're seeing guys sag back a little bit, not create that big open space around the free throw line, and then we're playing a lot of zone. So I think that those all have a factor in it. Our defense clearly needs to continue to get better. We all know this. The numbers don't look great, and they don't look great for a reason. And so hopefully as the season goes on, these guys have more continuity defensively. A lot of these guys are playing together, haven't played together before, and they don't know where the guy's going to be, where they can rely on help, and all that stuff. That all develops with on-court play. So, yeah, there are plenty of reasons for stuff like that happening, but we just got to kind of play through it, I guess, and maybe those turnovers will start to come later in the year when we have more confidence in the post defense.
Yep. Well, it's a joyous night for Indiana fans everywhere as the Hoosiers win 70-65. You'd like to say that this kind of puts Indiana a leg up on a lot of the other teams in the Big Ten. Certainly it does, being 1-0 and having a road victory. But how many road wins were there in the first weekend of Big Ten play? 4, 5? I mean, it's, this wasn't exactly as rare as it typically is, but still a huge moment for Indiana, a really big way to start conference play, just to have a road win already in your back pocket. For a team that typically does a pretty good job at home, to have this road win, to have it in a place where you've struggled. I mentioned on Twitter before the game, coming into tonight, Tom Crean was actually plus 13 against Nebraska in the 4 games he's coached at Indiana, but he was only 1-3 because we had the big win against Nebraska at home during Cody Zeller's sophomore year, but Indiana had lost the 3 other close games to Nebraska. So, tonight Tom Crean gets a second win over Nebraska, and anytime you can start out conference play with a road win, it's huge. So
hey, no matter what you say, we're in first place right now.
That's right. That's right. We are. And so let's lead that into your final thoughts, Ryan.
I think it's just tonight was a great win. We've talked about that. I mean, people can downplay it as being Nebraska and all that stuff. I thought that was a great win tonight. They really, really stayed together, played together, and showed toughness on the road, which is tough to do. It's really hard to do in the Big Ten. I also think it's really nice that at midnight we will close the chapter on what has been a very tough year for Indiana basketball. If you take the whole thing from last January to probably beginning of December this year, just a really, really hard year. Disappointments all over the place. And I think this was a great way to end that and sort of put it in the rearview mirror and say goodbye to it. Let's remember, next week when classes start, Devin Davis will be back and enrolled in Indiana, which is, again, another huge step and should make everybody feel good and happy. And, so 2014 was a rough one for Indiana basketball, for the program we all love. And, the reason we do this is because we love the program, the reason why we do this show. And so it was a really hard year, and it really hurt at times to be an IU fan. So I just thought it was a great way for the guys to close that out, put it in the rear view, and let's look forward to a great 2015.
Man, I couldn't say it better, so I'm not going to say much. That's a perfect thought to end on, Ryan. A good note to end 2014 on. We will be here after the Michigan State game. That game is Monday, January 5th. Looks like it's a 7 Eastern, 6 Central start. Game is on the Big Ten Network. We will see if Indiana can start out the season 2-0 with 2 road victories. Clearly, that is unlikely, but they already did. They already took the first step. They got the first road win. We'll see what the Hoosiers can do at Michigan State. It's another place that, like Nebraska, has been a house of horrors for Indiana, but we exercise some demons tonight. We'll see on Monday if we can exercise some additional demons against the Spartans. But with that said, thank you to everybody who watched live tonight. Go have a wonderful New Year's Eve. Be safe. Have fun. To everybody listening on the podcast, thank you. Make sure you go to assemblycall.com/subscribe and get on the email list. And with that said, enjoy your final few hours of 2014, and let's look forward to an even better 2015. And it all starts the 5th with Indiana against Michigan State. Have a good night, everybody.